Okay. I think we are good. Come on, come back. Come back, little Sheba. All right. Hello. Good morning to those of you in the morning-ish time zone. And good afternoon, good evening, whatever else, wherever else you may happen to be. I'm Tad. I will be here for the next, well, actually, it's thereby hangs a tale. I will actually probably be here for the next hour, but after stopping because I didn't see how much time there was left or how much book I had left to read and didn't want to get partway into the very ending and then realize I had already gone 20 minutes past the top of the hour or whatever. Because package-wise, I like to keep these about an hour. I went back and looked at it. There's only 7 pages left in the thing, which, will probably only take me 10 or 15 minutes to read. So what I am going to do tonight is I'm going to read the last 7 pages or so of The Dirty Streets of Heaven. And then I'm just going to plow ahead into Happy Hour in Hell, which is the second book in the Bobby Dollar 3 books. And the reason for this is that for a number of reasons, I think it'll be easy to read. And I will have to stop in a few weeks anyway, so it might as well be a longish book that I will be able to come back to, and it won't feel like we have dipped out at the near the ending or something like that. So I am going to read Happy Hour in Hell. This is a bunch of people said last time I read last Sunday evening at 7 Pacific time. I said, should I read this next? Should I read this next? And a bunch of the people on the broadcast at that point went, oh, Happy Hour in Hell, Happy Hour in Hell. So I'm going to go with that. Again, because it's one of my books, I don't have to worry about interfering with anybody's copyright. After that, I won't read the final book. Because that's like, then people have no incentive to go buy it or buy the the audiobook version, which is very good, which is George Newbern, who also did the Otherland books. And that would be a shame to cut into George's income because he did such a good job reading books of mine. Anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. As far as anything to say, I don't know if you can see in the background, not really. I'm actually finally getting to work on the office. I've got 2 bookcases over there that you can't see, but you'll have to just take my word for it that they now have books in them. There are books and bookcases. So there's also still a lot of stuff lying around, but I'm finally getting to deal with the office, which is a pleasure, believe me. And the cats are very happy, the downstairs cats, because now when I do my lying around thinking thing, which is, kind of a specialty of mine, the cats can come and cuddle up and use me for what I am best used for, which is providing warmth. I don't know where this happened to me in my life, what strange chain of events, genetic or otherwise, led to this, but everybody that I have ever lived with, animal or human, likes the fact that I seem to radiate a lot of heat. So in many ways, I have been used. I can't say abused, but I have been used for my body heat, certainly by animals, and also by my beloved wife, who will come serpenting over in the middle of the night and put her feet on me or whatever, But anyway, so the cats are happy. As you can see, I have a daybed now behind me that the cats can hang out on. Also, the stuffed dinosaur can. That's actually one of my daughter's stuffies that we saved from her childhood because a bunch of the rest of them got croaked by rats, which was really sad. But this is what happens when you live in rustic areas. You have a hole in your garage or something, and all of a sudden, next time you go back out, there's like all the boxes have holes chewed in them, and it's just disgusting. And not to mention what they did to so many of her stuffed animals. So I saved that one, and I've hung on to it. I don't know if she'll even take it with her, or if it just lives with me now. And my beloved gorilla. I have a stuffed Coco, a stuffed life-size Coco the gorilla, which for many years was down here in the office with me. But although it's okay still, and I still have it, it also suffered some rat damage, not so easily visible. But I want to clean it up before I bring it back into the office. God, just what you guys wanted to hear about, right? Was rat damage. I'm sure you all went, God, I hope he talks about rat damage tonight. Yeah, we haven't had anything good like that for a while. What else is there to tell you? Dogs are still the dogs. The dogs are the dogs. We've kind of hit a plateau, I think, of dog interaction for now, which I'm not going to be able to do anything about until we get back from our trip at the end of this month. But basically, Johnny stays outside until the new dog, Lemon, is locked in her crate in the evenings at bedtime. And then Johnny comes back in, and then he's happy because she can't make him nervous because she's locked up in her crate. And, you know, it's working in the sense that, you know, they're not fighting. They're not buddies, but they're not trying to kill each other. You know, we can bring Johnny in and give them both treats, and they'll be within a few feet of each other, and there's no problem and stuff like that. But Johnny still chooses to be outside. So, you know, I got him a dog house, and I got him a special pad to lie on outside the dog house when he doesn't want to be in the dog house and wants to get sun or something. We have spent so much, God blessed, money on this dog, on this new dog, and on all the rearrangement of the household that has had to take place. Nightmare. Anyway, yes, and as you can see there, the cats are enjoying the daybed very much. Anyway, so what else is there to say? Still working on all the history and stuff for the Splintered Sun. And very happy that I decided to stop and do that, because now things are making a lot more sense to me in terms of, you know, how things are seated, how things are situated, and what the history of certain situations are. And I'm going into the background of a lot of characters and stuff. I'm sure you're totally distracted by watching the idiot cat in the background playing games on the daybed. But anyway, so that's going along, and now I have a downstairs bed where I can hang out and do my thinking. Let me think. Yeah, and I've been, of course, working on the office. I built a bookshelf yesterday, I think it was. It took me like 2.5 hours, not because it was difficult per se, because there were just dozens and dozens and dozens of shelves and braces and blah, blah, blah. It's just a tiny little bookcase. I mean, not tiny. It's fairly good size. But, I mean, it's like tiny in terms of the actual wood. It's bamboo, and it's quite thin. It's not bamboo like unchanged bamboo, like round stalks. It's, you know, bamboo wood. But, you know, it just had to be multiply braced. And I don't know. There was something like 100 little screws I had to put in with a Allen wrench. Is what we call them here in America. And of course, the situation, because there were so many of them to be put in, and so many braces and so many shelves, it's like you're always like at this weird angle where you can't quite get the Allen wrench in without like getting an extra pair of pliers to kind of twist it a little bit, and then twist it a little bit, and then twist it a little bit. Anyway, it took hours, but I finished. And slowly but surely, the office is rounding into shape, and eventually I will probably never leave. I will just stay down here all the time, because then I don't have to deal with the real world. Okay, what else? Speaking of the real world, or at least the kind of approximation of it that I prefer, which is the folks who come show up for the reading. Let me check and see who's checked in. And, oh, I don't want that one. That's only got a couple of comments on it. Where's the other one? Okay, good, excellent. All right, so I see Sandra is checking in from Vienna. I see Wouter checking in from the Netherlands. Who else is here? Christy Sanders. Hello, good morning, Christy. Nikki Chetwynd. Hello, checking in from Leicestershire. And Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, and Voucher says that Iris says hi as well. So hello to both of you. Kristen, that's Kristen Rule. Hello, Kristen. Suzanne Owen checks in to say sunny and cold in Yorkshire, though with some cloud, walking in the Dales after this. We will probably be doing a little time in the general area of the Dales. Well, I don't know. My geography of the north of England is somewhat shaky, but we're going to be somewhere in the vicinity of Haworth. Anyway, and Deb is trying to ask me if I want to go see the where the Brontes lived. So we're thinking about that. But of course, as usual, we've got way too much stuff crammed into a schedule already. So we'll see. Sandra says, a dinosaur-shaped listener. Yes, although the dinosaur has not moved in several days, so I don't know how carefully he or she is listening. Daniela Meyer. Hello, Daniela, and welcome. Nice to have you. Mr. Mark Craigbaum. Good to see you, buddy. Mark Redmond checks in from sunny Yorkshire. Nicole Grass. Hello, good morning. Nicole is in Germany. Chris Fabb is also in Germany and says, good morning, y'all. Ooh, nice Americanism there. Very good. I am actually one of the few people, not few, but I am one of the people in California, for instance, outside of the South and the Southwest in America who can actually say y'all without it being cultural appropriation, because my grandmother was from Tennessee. And I was raised with y'all as the second person plural. And I still use it. I'm sure some of you who follow my online babbling will have recognized that I use it oftentimes and rather shamelessly there. I realize it is not something you normally hear from Californians, or at least you didn't used to before rap music and hip hop. But it definitely is something that I feel quite comfortable using because I've been using it all my life. So, Chris asked, does Deb have a favorite marzipan also? I don't know. I will have to ask her. She definitely has got her own box. So I'll if I can find it, I can tell you which one she ate first. Jeremy, hello. Good to see you, buddy. Dinosaur, behind you. I know. Scary, huh? Leonard Bernstein also worked lying down. It's part of it. I mean, I make fun of myself this way quite frequently, and certainly anybody who knows me knows that, it's not something that I hide from anybody. But I will be honest, part of the reason why I do so much of my thinking and that part of my work literally lying down is just I have bad joints. I got inflammation issues, and sitting in a chair, even like right now where I'm sitting in a fairly comfortable chair, much more than an hour, and it's like super uncomfortable, and I'm having to get up and walk around and stretch and do things like that. Whereas if I lie down on my back, that stuff just goes away and I can just think. The downside is that sometimes you get sleepy, but interestingly enough, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this in your own lives or creative journeys, sometimes the very best stuff happens just when you start to get sleepy, but before you temporarily doze off. There's a lot of, because the logic barriers start to break down and you get a little dreamlike. And sometimes some of the best stuff comes out of that, actually. Kristen says, poor stuffed animals. I know, it was sad. We've had bad luck with stuffed animals in this family. Mads Magsano, and hello, Mads. Nice to have you with us. Suzanne knows Haworth. Haworth is how it's pronounced. That's right. Know Haworth fairly well. Haworth and the Brontes, well worth a visit, says Mark. Such a beautiful place. Yeah, I've only seen pictures, but it is gorgeous. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it, though, because we're already trying to see a whole ton of... Deborah went to school. Deborah went to university at Manchester. So she's got, and was, a big habitué of the club scene in the late 70s, early 80s. And so Deborah is got tons of friends, and it was a big part of her life. As a matter of fact, when people ask Deb where she's from, she will always list Manchester, even though she was only there for a few years. But she will say, well, I was born near Birmingham, and then I lived in Manchester, and she'll even say sometimes things like that's where I invented myself, or I can't remember what her phrase was. And then London, of course, for many years when she was in publishing, which is how we met. But she always wants to mention Manchester because that was such an important place to her. So yeah, we'll be, when we're in the north, we're going to be running around all over the place, seeing tons and tons of people. Which also happened last time, except that I had the bad luck or the bad procedure to bring home COVID from the British Fantasy Con halfway through our trip and messed the whole thing up, which was on me. But nothing to be done about that. Now it's just something that I will learn from in the future. That which does not kill me or does not get me killed by my wife ultimately makes me stronger. Okay, so with that said, let us move along, and I am going to start the last chapter. I think it's the last chapter of The Dirty Streets of Heaven, and then, as I mentioned, I am going to steam on ahead into the next Bobby Dollar book, just because it's easier for me for a number of reasons. But anyway, so let's start. So this is chapter 39 with the eponymous title, I think you would call it, of The Dirty Streets of Heaven. Those of you, by the way, who weren't with me for the last one, basically we had the big confrontation out at, not Playland, what do we call it in this version? God, I can't even remember. It's not Playland. Playland was in San Francisco. This is an imaginary thing at the southern end of the bay, near my imaginary city of San Judas. Anyway, it slipped my mind right now, but it'll come back. Anyway, but so we had the whole thing worked out there. Bobby managed to kill the Galu finally. He let Sam escape after discovering that it was Sam who Clarence was kind of keeping an eye on all the time. He did this by thumping Clarence on the back of the head and then telling him that it was a last death thrash from the Galu. And now Bobby and Clarence are walking out toward the thing. There was also a brief conversation about how did he even get over here? How did Clarence even get over here since he doesn't have a car? Well, now we're going to find out. Chapter 39, The Dirty Streets of Heaven. One more nasty surprise awaited me. As Clarence and I made our way, in my case, my staggering, exhausted, stinking way, off the footbridge on the mainland side, a car waited for us in the parking lot. But it wasn't a Lincoln Continental or any other kind of old lady car. It was the ugliest, pimped-out, red gangsta mobile imaginable. I'd seen it before. Garcia Windhover was wearing what I imagine was his idea of a stealth mission suit. All black, including a do-rag that made him look like Lil Wayne's severely anemic nephew. The stealth aspect was undercut a bit by the immense words, "Fuck all of y'all," written across the front of his baggy XXXL t-shirt in screaming white letters. "Mr. D!" He spread his arms exactly like he was welcoming me back from a tour of combat duty. Although, in some ways, it was true. In fact, I felt like I'd been dropped out of an airplane without a parachute. G-Man was not exactly the person I would have hoped to find waiting for me when I got back on home soil. I ducked his enthusiastic bro hug like a weary matador. "What the hell are you doing here?" I turned to Clarence, who at least had the good grace to look sheepish. "Why is he here? How do you two even know each other?" "I told you I knew where you were, where you went," Clarence said, "because I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know whether you were in cahoots with Sam, and so, well, I was kind of checking up after you." "Then he told me how he was your partner," said Garcia with all the relish of a teenager confirming an urban legend he had heard from someone who had heard it from the guy it happened to. "So here I am, dude." I glared at Clarence, who shrugged and couldn't quite meet my eye. I needed a ride, he admitted. I could tell something big was going down when you guys left the hotel, and then I heard what had happened to the hotel on the television news. You called him for a ride? I said quietly as Garcia opened all 4 doors, even though there were only 3 of us. Shit, Clarence, you're the worst undercover agent ever. It takes about half an hour to get a cab up to Britain Heights, Bobby. I was in a hurry, and he told me that he'd worked for you before. Totally, said Garcia, brushing some loose popcorn kernels out of the back seat. I can be your wheelman. No fucking way, I said. We are not partners. I am not partners with you, Windhover, or you, Special Agent Treacherous Bastard. I glared at Clarence. Garcia looked intrigued. Can I have a code name too, Mr. D? Yes, idiot. And you may not call me Mr. D either. Then what should I call you? 5 minutes ago, I would have said an ambulance. I dragged my weary bones into the back seat, then stretched out, dripping all over Garcia's leather upholstery. My head was pressed uncomfortably against the door, but I didn't care. Now, I just want to take 3 or 4 showers and sleep until August. So let's go. We could be your associates, Garcia said cheerfully. That sounds more badass anyway. I groaned and closed my eyes and let the dizzy darkness climb back over me. I dimly felt the thump of Garcia backing over a concrete parking stop, the hydraulics in his stupid car setting the whole thing wobbling like a waterbed. Then I surrendered to oblivion. I finally made it to the Compasses about 11 the next evening, limping and bruised and burned, but finally clean and at least partially rested. I waved to Cool Filter, who was puffing furiously and talking into his Bluetooth, and I trudged up the stairs. The place looked pretty good, considering that the end facing the street had been reduced to rubble only a short time earlier. The floor had been swept, the worst damage hauled away or covered with plastic tarps, and Chico had a makeshift bar going, a big slab of 1 1/4-inch plywood on trestles with boxes of booze stacked behind it. He had also salvaged enough chairs and tables from the wreckage that, if you squinted, it didn't look all that different from an ordinary weekday night. Monica was sitting with Sweetheart, but she trotted over when she saw me and gave me a hug. The mere fact of her being kind and female was enough to make me mist up. But I didn't want to mist up, and I certainly didn't want to confuse Monica with all my weird emotions, so after just a few seconds I broke free. She let go, only reluctantly. When we heard about the Ralston, we thought you were dead, or worse, she said. I was so worried about you, Bobby. Where's Sam? Is he okay? Obviously, the real news had not got out yet. Clarence had actually kept his word. I wondered how hard my bosses were going to try to hush everything up. He's okay, yeah, but I think he may be taking a long leave of absence. While Monica and Sweetheart pondered this, I asked Chico for one of his pricier iced vodkas and some orange juice, in 2 separate glasses. Discovering how out of shape I was, it made me consider adopting a healthier lifestyle. Drinking the orange juice separately seemed like it might fit the bill. For about an hour, I chatted amiably and in large part untruthfully with the whole sick choir in 1s and 2s, but Monica and the rest could see I mostly wanted to be on my own in a room full of people, and so they didn't stay long at my table. We'd all been there, all had something go so bad that it clung to your mind for weeks. That's one of the best things about the Compasses. Everybody gets it. Besides, I knew I'd have to go to Mecca the next morning and make my official report, and since I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, I didn't want to box myself in too much now. A lot of people were going to be looking over my version of what went down at the Ralston and afterward. And, of course, my bosses must have already been wondering if I'd been contaminated by my friendship with Sam, which was, of course, quite true. I'd let him go, hadn't I? While everybody else talked and laughed, I sat and rehearsed a few possibilities of how I could play it with my bosses. I was feeling flimsy and weightless, but not in an entirely bad way. Like a feather, maybe. Like the invisible feather I'd been carrying with me without even knowing it and which I still carried. It was strange to think I was sitting here surrounded by the old familiar while I had something in my pocket that could blow everything familiar sky high. I had to hope that heaven really was heaven, or at least a good copy, because otherwise I knew way too much about too many things to be left walking around. Thoughts like these kept swirling round and round until at last I gave up thinking for the evening. You can overthink until you get paralyzed. I'd decided I'd come up with some useful half-truth for the bosses, and I'd hang on to those half-truths no matter what anyone said. At least I'd find out once and for all if anyone can lie to heaven. It wasn't that different from what I've been doing for years anyway, I told myself. Just a more straightforward approach to deception. Another day at the office, really. The streets of heaven might be paved with bullshit and paperwork, but I'd been walking those dirty streets for a good long time now. I felt pretty sure I knew what to say and what not to say. After that, it would all be in his hands. Eventually, young Elvis started a stupid discussion about the hotel fire, yammering on and on about how he was certain it was one of the demon lords trying to off a rival, which was partly true, but his list of suspects had no relationship to the real events. I stopped listening when Walter Sanders suggested that young Elvis had blown up the building himself because they wouldn't let him into the conference. Mostly, I just watched. Mostly, I just waited for Sam to walk in, even though I knew he wouldn't. And I thought about Kaz, of course. I thought about Kaz a lot. Thinking about someone you can't have is a special kind of hell you can summon without drawing a single pentagram. It was a bit after midnight when Clarence entered. No Garcia Windhover tagging along this time, all praises to the highest. The kid said hello to Monica and the others, hesitated, then got himself a beer and slid into the chair across from me. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Why did you do it, Junior? Really?" He looked surprised. "Because I had to, Bobby. They chose me and it was my job. I'm sorry about Sam." "Yeah, I am too. So now what? Back to Cloud 9 to get a medal pinned on your robe? Did you finally earn your wings?" "Actually, I think I'd like to stay here. I mean, I like this job. The real job, not what they sent me here to do." I wasn't sure I was ready to believe that. "Sam said you made up all that bullshit you kept asking him about. All that, why are we here, or what's really going on, pretending to doubt the status quo." A strange look flitted across his face. "Yeah, made it all up to see if I could shake something loose." "Why? Don't you ever ask those kinds of questions anymore, Bobby?" I tried to hate him, but I couldn't. He was just an eager young officer trying to do his job, just another righteous angel of the Lord. "I told you once, kid, I only ask questions I can hope to get answered." He nodded. "Sensible. Keep your sights set low. That way you won't get into trouble." Now it was my turn to give him the strange look. Was the kid trying to get me to say something incriminating, or was he warning me not to? Or was something else going on with him? Something more complicated? No, not biting. I pushed myself away from the table and stood up, which in my condition was harder than it sounds. I'd spent too much time already getting dragged around by questions like that, and I badly needed to sleep again. I needed other things too, but sleep was the only one I was likely to get. Anyway, it had to beat sitting here, listening to Jimmy the Table and Sweetheart, laughing over the old story of the guy who fell through a skylight and died burglarizing a house, and then tried to convince his heavenly advocate that he'd only been checking the neighborhood rooftops for endangered birds. Not that it wasn't a good story. I nodded to Clarence and then headed for the door. Monica was looking the other way, which saved me having to say goodbye. My car was still in the parking lot at the Ralston Hotel, so I was walking, which suited my mood. It was a decent late spring night, and a few folks were coming out of the bars on Main Street. I let myself drift with them, listening to the conversations, marveling at the bubble these mortals lived in, the things that went on all around them that they couldn't and wouldn't want to see. I could have walked back to my own apartment, but I hadn't slept there in a long time. It would be cold, and the bed would need making, which made the whole thing seem like work, when all I wanted was to take a long shower and collapse. Instead, I headed back for one last night at the motel where I'd made Garcia and Clarence drop me off after Shoreline Park. After all, I was getting used to motels. I limped up Jefferson as the clubbers and bar patrons gradually split off to find their cars or a bus stop, until I was the only person still walking. The apartment buildings on either side of the street had gone quiet, with lights on in less than half the windows, the patterns of illumination as abstract as modernist paintings. I stopped in a corner bodega and bought myself a bottle of something to drink. The guy behind the counter barely looked up from the Punjabi soap opera on his little television. When I finally reached my room at the Mission Rancho Motor Lodge, I found I wasn't that sleepy anymore. I dumped my coat, turned off my phone, turned on some music, and carried my drink out onto the balcony. Across the park, the old Mission was dark, but for that single bulb over the door. Lights burned in some of the other motel rooms, but for once the guests were pretty quiet. A guy went by, whistling on the street down below, walking an old dog who stopped every few steps to sniff something. After a day like I'd had, I decided against using a glass. Instead, I drank my orange juice straight out of the bottle as I watched the bugs circle the little light in front of God's first house in San Judas, and I kept company with all my ghosts, the old ones and the new. And that is the end of 30 Streets of Heaven. So, with no further ado, a little further ado, I am going to, actually here, let me do this first. Okay, so I hope you don't mind that I'm continuing with another Bobby Dollar book. It is actually kind of an interesting one, I think, and I'll be interested to hear what some of you think of it. It is, I think, some of the best world building I've ever done. On the other hand, it's good world building with a depressing subject, which is like, how would hell actually work? If there was such a thing, and it wasn't just something that people used to try to scare people. I quite enjoyed working on it. It was great fun working on Happy Hour in Hell. But the interesting thing was that I think the fact that so much of it takes place in hell, and I really wanted to just kind of display what a place like that would actually be like and how it could actually function, assuming that everything else in the Bobby Dollar books was all true, and that it was essentially a version of the, at least for some of these characters, it was a Judeo-Christian view of life and afterlife and death and punishment and reward and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's one of my most successful world buildings, but at the same time, I think it's also probably kind of was, I don't know, I think it probably depressed people. I know, for instance, it has a slightly lower score on like Amazon and Goodreads and stuff than the first and the third book. Part of it may be because it's a bit longer, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's not a nice place. I mean, it's still action, adventure, and I hope humor in it, but if you're going to write a book of which the last 2/3 of it or so are all take place in hell, it's just not going to be a lot of fun, despite the title. So, with that said, I hope you will all bear with me, and I will start another Bobby Dollar, and we will continue on in that vein, so to speak, for a while. Anyway, so happy hour in hell. Prologue. Welcome, Matt. A moment comes in pretty much everyone's life, or afterlife in my case, where they can't help but wonder, what the fuck am I doing here? I've had more of those than most people, a couple a week on average, but I'd never had one quite like this before. See, I was just about to walk into hell. Voluntarily. My name is Bobby Dollar, or sometimes Deloriel, depending on the company I'm keeping. I'd arrived at this ugly spot by elevator. A long, long ride down that I may or may not tell you about at some point. I was also wearing a body that wasn't my own, and all my information about the place came from a rogue guardian angel whispering in my mind while I was sleeping. Not that I had learned much useful stuff from her. In fact, most of it could be summed up with the simple phrase, "You can't even guess how bad this is going to be." So there I stood, just outside hell, at the foot of the Neronian Bridge, a featureless flat span of stone that stretched over a chasm so deep that if we had been on ordinary old Earth, the hole would have probably gone all the way through the planet and out of the other side. But hell isn't on ordinary Earth, and this pit wasn't bottomless. Oh, no. See, at the bottom, impossible miles and miles below me in the darkness, the really bad shit was going on. I could tell that because of the faint sounds of screaming. I couldn't help wondering how hard those folks had to be screaming to be heard that far. Also, what exactly was being done to them to make them scream like that? Already I was asking questions with answers I didn't want to know. Just in case all this isn't weird enough for you, here's another interesting fact. I'm an angel. So not only was I headed to the worst possible place anyone could ever go, I was doing it as a spy and an enemy. Oh, and I was going there to steal something from one of the cruelest, most powerful demons that ever existed, Eligor the Horseman, Grand Duke of Hell. What was I trying to steal from Eligor? My girlfriend, Kaz. She's also a demon, and she belongs to him. Oh, and when I said I was an angel, I didn't mean the avenging kind with wings and the Lord's righteous fire to wield against my enemies. No, I'm the kind who lives on Earth, pretends to be human most of the time, and advocates on behalf of human souls at judgment. In other words, I'm pretty much a public defender. So, what I brought to the conflict was just enough information to know I was in serious trouble. Me against a Grand Duke of Hell on his home turf. Great matchup, huh? I was in what was, without question, the biggest enclosed space I'd ever seen, that anyone had ever seen, probably. All those medieval artists who'd pictured the place, even the really inventive ones, had never thought big enough for this. A wall of rugged stone surrounded me, extending straight up beyond sight. It seemed to be ever so slightly curved on either side, as though the vast cavern itself was the casing of a monstrous engine cylinder. Presumably, there was another wall in front of me on the far side of the bridge, the piston inside that bigger cylinder, and the point of my visit, the endless tower that is hell. The bridge itself was narrower than my arms could stretch to either side, a walking surface only about 1.5 yards wide. That would have been plenty, except for the fact that beneath the narrow span lay nothing but emptiness. A pit that extended down farther than I could see or even understand, with just enough flickering hell light to let me know how very, very far I'd be falling if I took a wrong step. Trust me, Like any sane being, I would have rather been anywhere else, but as I'll explain later, I'd worked hard to get even this far. I had learned how to get here, found an entrance nobody remembered to guard, and I was even wearing a brand new demon body, because that's the only way I could travel safely in hell. I might have been an unwanted guest, but I had already paid quite a bit to take this ride. As I approached the span, I gulped a deep breath, made gritty by sulfur smoke and the faint but unmistakable tang of crisping flesh. A stone skittered away from my foot and bounced into the pit. I didn't wait to hear if it made a noise, since there wouldn't have been much point. You can only stall something terrible so long before all the courage just leaks out of you, and I knew that things would only get worse from here. Even if I made it across this whisper-thin span and managed to sneak into hell, the whole place was jam-packed with creatures that just plain hated angels in general, and me in particular. The Neronian Bridge dates back to ancient Rome, and it's named after the Emperor Nero, the one who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. Nero wasn't the worst emperor Rome ever had, but he was pretty much of a horrible bastard anyway, and one of the ways we know this is because he had his own mother murdered. Twice. His mother, Agrippina, was the sister of another even nastier little bastard you may have heard of, Caligula. Caligula married one of his other sisters, but he humped them all. Still, despite all the creepy stuff with her brother, after Caligula was stabbed to death by his own guards, Agrippina was rehabilitated and eventually married Caligula's successor, old Emperor Claudius. Somehow, she even managed to convince Claudius to put aside his own beloved son and instead make Nero, her son by a previous marriage, his heir. Once Nero was the emperor designate, she bumped off poor Claudius by feeding him poisoned mushrooms. Clearly grateful for his mother's assistance in becoming the most powerful man in the world, Nero promptly turned around and ordered her killed. He first tried to do it with a trick boat that was supposed to break apart so she'd drown, but Agrippina was a tough old bitch and made it back to land. So Nero sent some of his guardsmen over to her house to stab her to death with swords. Family values, Roman Empire style. Nero did a lot of other pretty terrible stuff during the rest of his reign, including burning a buttload of innocent Christians, but that isn't the reason he got his own little highway project in hell, the bridge I stood in front of now. See, what Nero didn't realize is that his mother's coup in getting Claudius to marry her and raise Nero above his own son was the result of a little bargain she'd made with one of hell's more influential inhabitants, a powerful demon by the name of Ignoculi. Now, Ignoculi and his infernal pals didn't give a literal damn about Nero killing his mother. In fact, they rather admired it. But they did expect him to live up to the terms of the bargain his mother had made to put Nero on the throne of the Roman Empire, because hell had big plans for Rome. But Nero refused to play along. To be honest, he probably didn't realize how big an operation hell really was. The Romans had a different religious picture of things, Pluto and the Elysian fields and all that stuff. It was probably a bit like that movie producer in The Godfather who thought he could tell Don Corleone to fuck off, then woke up to find a horse's head added to the bedroom decor. Pissing off hell is not a good idea. Things went downhill rapidly for young Nero, and within a short period of time he found himself off the throne and on the run. He eventually wound up committing suicide. However, the real surprises were still waiting for him. Ignoculi, like most of hell's executives, was extremely good at bearing a grudge. When Nero arrived in hell, it was to discover a special entrance had been built just for him. Yep, the Neronian Bridge. 1,000 demons, dressed in the finery of Roman imperial guardsmen, were already there, waiting to accompany Nero across it in the splendor to which he had become accustomed in life. The great procession set off in single file across the abyss, drums pounding and trumpets tootling, But when Nero reached the other end, his retinue abruptly vanished, leaving only the emperor and the one who was waiting to greet him. Not Ignoculi himself, but Nero's late mother, Agrippina. She must have made a pretty awful sight, crooked and broken and soaking wet from Nero's first attempt on her life, streaming blood from the sword thrusts that killed her. Nero, suddenly realizing that he was going to receive something less than a hero's welcome, tried to flee back across the bridge. But now Ignoculi himself made an appearance on the bridge, a huge quivering glob of eyes and teeth that blocked the ex-emperor's retreat like a ton of angry snot. Caveat imperator, the demon reportedly said. In hell, bad puns are considered a particularly ripe form of torture. Then Agrippina grabbed her son in her bloody, mangled fingers and, with strength she'd never had in life, dragged him shrieking through the gate to hell and the less than imperial fate prepared for him. And, of course, from what I've heard, he's still there, probably down at the bottom, with the rest of the screamers. After that, the Neronian bridge was largely forgotten until I got there. Just another monument to why you never, never, never get one of hell's high rollers mad at you. Something that I had already managed big time. Do you think the universe might have been trying to tell me something? I stepped onto the bridge and started walking. I had been putting one foot in front of the other for what seemed hours when I noticed that the screams wafting up from below seemed to be growing louder. I hoped that meant I was finally nearing the center of the bridge, but it might just have been that lunch break was over downstairs. I looked down, steadying myself against a dizziness that wasn't just physical but existential. Perspective turned the flames issuing from cracks in the pit walls into shrinking, tightening rings of concentric fire, like a burning bullseye. Leathery wings flapped past my face, startling me badly, and I realized how close to the edge I was standing. I moved back into the middle of the bridge and began walking again, still in the wrong direction by any sane standard. The winged thing fluttered past me again, brushing against my skin, but the light was too faint to make out what it was. I don't think it was a bat, because it was crying. Hours and hours later, the smoldering bullseye was still more or less right beneath me. When you're crossing a hell moat that could be as wide as South Dakota, I guess the idea of near the middle is fairly relative, but it sure was depressing. But this was all for Kaz, I kept reminding myself, for the Countess of Cold Hands, the beautiful, ruined young girl trapped in an immortal body and sentenced to hell. No, it wasn't even for Kaz, it was for what we had together, for the moments of happiness and peace I had felt lying in bed with her while the infernal hordes harrowed the streets of San Judas looking for me. Yes, she was one of those infernal minions herself, and yes, she had all but told me that I was turning an incident of straightforward battlefield sex between two enemies into some absurd, juvenile love story. But oh, my sweet God, she was lovely. Nothing in my angelic life had made me feel like she did. Even more, my time with her had showed me that my existence up to this point had been hollow. If it hadn't been for that, maybe I could have believed it was all demonic glamour, that I had simply been seduced, that I'd fallen for the oldest trick in the adversary's book. There was another reason I didn't think I was simply being played for a chump. It had to do with the silver locket, but I'll tell you more about that later. Anyway, if what I felt for Kaz was just a trick, an illusion, then nothing else mattered either. Love. Tired old jokes aside, a real powerful love does have one thing in common with hell itself. It burns everything else out of you. Hours in, hypnotized by endless flickering shadows, it took me far longer than it should have to realize that the spot of darkness on the bridge ahead of me was not simply another shadow or a floating spot in my vision, but something real. I slowed, squinting, my dreamy half-life suddenly cracked into pieces. Was it waiting for me? Had Eligor found out I was coming and prepared a welcome for me, something like that horned Babylonian nightmare that I had barely managed to survive back in San Jude? The only thing that had stopped the last one was a precious piece of silver, Kaz's locket. But I didn't have anything like that now. My new demon body was naked, and I didn't have a gun. I didn't even have a stick. As I got closer, I saw that the shape wasn't standing erect like a man, but was on all fours like an animal. Closer still, and I could see that it was crawling away from me, which gave me my first moment of relief since I'd stepped onto this bloody bridge. Mama Dollar's baby boy is no fool, though, or at least not in the obvious ways. As I began to catch up to the solitary crawler, I slowed down so I could examine it. It was manlike, but unpleasant to watch, like a blind, clumsy insect. Its hands were clubbed and fingerless, the body distorted, and even by the standards of that miserable place, it reflected very little light. It seemed less like a solid thing and more like a smudge on the surface of reality. I was right behind it now, but it seemed unaware of my presence, still crawling like a crippled penitent, drawing itself along as though each movement was miserably difficult. The very slowness of its progress made me wonder how long it had been on the bridge. I didn't want to walk around it, not on that narrow span. Just because it looked slow and stupid didn't mean it wouldn't turn on me. I considered simply jumping over it, but I didn't trust the footing either. "What are you doing?" I said. "Are you hurt?" The sudden noise of my new, raspy demon voice startled even me, but the crawling thing gave no indication it had heard. I tried again. "I need to get past you." Nothing. If the crawling thing wasn't deaf, it was sure acting like it. Frustrated, I finally reached down and yanked on its leg to get its attention, but although the man shape looked solid, it was as brittle as a dessert meringue. The entire limb broke loose underneath my fingers in flaky shards, leaving nothing below the knee. In horror, I dropped the substantial piece of leg. It broke into pieces, many of which bounced slowly over the edge of the bridge and vanished into darkness. The thing finally stopped crawling long enough to turn toward me, and I caught a glimpse of a gray face with empty hollows for eyes and an equally empty hole of a mouth stretched wide in surprise or horror. Then it tilted to one side as if the loss of the leg had overbalanced it and toppled off the bridge without a sound. Shaken, I stepped over the greasy flakes that remained and walked on. Whatever the crumbling horror might have been, it was not the only one of its kind. I caught up with the next gray thing before too long. Another man-shaped blob creeping toward the still invisible walls of hell. I tried to poke this one gently enough to get its attention. It seemed as fragile as sea foam, but just the feel of it on my fingertip made me queasy. How could something with no substance hold a shape, let alone crawl forward with such blind determination? But this is hell, I reminded myself, or at least the suburbs. Nothing normal applied here. I poked it again. Like its predecessor, it turned, but this one reached for me with its shapeless hands. In fear and disgust, I stepped back and kicked at it, catching it square in the hindquarters. With a whispering crunch, it broke into several large pieces. I waded through them, though they were still slowly squirming, and kicked several of them into the abyss. I didn't stop to watch them fall. As hours passed, or would have anywhere else, I encountered more of the hideous things. I'd given up any idea of communicating with them and simply kicked them out of my way, wading through the sentient scraps. When I had crushed several of them, I began to notice an odor on my skin, like faint traces of lighter fluid in the ashes of a barbecue pit. The things were slow and mindless as dying termites, and disgusting in a way I can't even explain. I wanted to grind each one of them to powder, to scatter their very atoms to the void. In fact, I was losing what little remained of my mind. What saved me, strangely enough, was hell itself. After fighting my way through an entire squirming pack of the things, showering myself in the emptiness on either side of the bridge with ashy fragments, I bent over in a cloud of the last swirling bits and realized that the bridge no longer narrowed to nothingness in front of me. The terrible span had an endpoint, something I had only believed because I had to. Now I could see it ahead of me, a wall of broken black stone with a titanic gate of rusted iron in the middle of it, tall as a skyscraper. But thousands of the gray, mindless things still squirmed between me and that gate. I'm betting that some of you can't imagine what was so bad about having to fight through things that offered no resistance of any kind, that collapsed under my touch like fireplace ash. Try thinking about it this way. There might have been nothing left of them but crude shapes, like the dead of Pompeii, preserved in the fiery ash that spewed from Vesuvius. But they had all been people once. You see, as I came up that last span, fighting my way through the creeping shapes, making a storm of floating powdery fragments until I couldn't see my own feet or the bridge, I finally realized what they were. Not damned souls. That would have been bad enough. These weren't prisoners of hell. They weren't trying to get out. They were trying to get in. The shapes were souls who had been sentenced to purgatory, the essences of countless human lives, failed lives, but not irreparably evil. And for whatever reason, these things, once men and women, were so consumed by self-hatred that they crawled forward forever toward the place where they felt they truly belonged. I should have pitied them, but understanding only made it worse. As I neared the walls of hell, the things flocked as thickly as insects swarming around a hot light bulb, driven by a self-destructive urge they couldn't understand. I was too exhausted to say anything, but inside I was screaming. I thrashed through the clotted mass as if I were swimming until everything was and had ever been dissolved into a madness of greasy flakes and swirling kerosene-scented dust, until I no longer knew where I was, let alone where the bridge was, the only thing between me and oblivion. The fact that I did not fall is the only testament I will ever need that something or someone bigger than me wanted me to survive. Grunting, gasping, I stopped to suck in air and realized abruptly that nothing stood before me now but the massive rusty entrance and bare black stone. I had reached the shadows beneath the gate. The swarming crawlers were now behind me, confined to the bridge as if by an invisible fence. The pathetic, self-loathing things didn't belong in hell. They just believed they did. They would not be admitted. But Bobby Dollar? Apparently I was different. No guards and nothing to keep me from walking in, but the good sense I had surrendered a long time back. By hell's charming standards, they'd pretty much put out the welcome mat. But I don't think I'm giving away too much when I tell you it wasn't going to prove anywhere near as easy getting back out again. And coming next, which will be 7 p.m., I guess, is Chapter 1, titled Pillow Talk, as we go back to how Bobby wound up in the situation of walking across the Neronian Bridge in the first place. So, with that, I thank you for your indulgence. I thank you for your presence. I thank you for your kindness. And I thank you for all that stuff. And just in general for putting up with me and hanging out. I will be back at 7 p.m. tonight to continue with the further adventures of Bobby Angel Deloriel Dollar. And with that, I say until then, or until I see you next, whenever that may be, take good care of yourselves. That's important. Take good care of your family, friends, loved ones, all those close to you. That's also important. But also keep an eye out for others who you might not know as well, but who might benefit from a kind word. Smile, a couple of bucks if they're out begging on the street, because nobody does that for fun. They don't. It's just not something that anybody does for fun. They do it because they can't think of any other way to get some money for food or for whatever. So, with that, I say peace. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I will be back later today. And then I will see those of you who can't make it to that one, I will see you either on YouTube or next week. So, ciao ragazzi, ciao bambini, and I see you very soon. Okay, bye.